We have had a wonderful week with two of Xiping's talks. On Monday, when he talked about the creativity of tradition and gave us an insight in his own work, which was in the history of his own work, which was absolutely fascinating. On Wednesday, we had another talk about sort of the creativity of reality and how he, as an artist, has engaged with the reality around him, and especially, which I thought was fascinating, the new reality he found in China after having been in New York in a very different environment for so long. Today we have as speakers a number of wonderfully interesting people from Britain as well as from the United States. They include, for the first panel, we have Joshua Jiang from Birmingham City University. We also have Vimalin Rujivacharakul from the University of Delaware. Our first session will be talking about the urban landscape. Of course, the urban world, the new urban world in China is very important, has become very important, in contrast actually to earlier periods when it was the countryside that was hugely important. Then the second session deals with the question of frames. We have Ross Holmes, a JRF at Christ Church in Oxford, who will talk about Between the Mountains and the Seas, Animating Contemporary China. And we also have Shane from SOAS, who will talk about living tradition in the frame. The final session, our third session, is about Chinese art in global context. And we have Amy Li, or Li Xiaofan, from Oxford as well, but originally from Cambridge, I can claim. Good. Connecting with Chinese antiquity, the case of 20th century Francophone writers and artists. And also Wenny To from the Courtauld Institute, who will appropriately, I suspect, conclude our afternoon with a talk with the title, It's Not Funny. There are sort of two changes I want to alert you to the schedule. Rather than, I think what we'll do is have a first hour and then have a half an hour break, unlike just a quarter of an hour, with so many people that I think it will take us a while to go in, go out, have our tea, have our coffee, talk to each other, things like that. And then we sort of run the next two sessions straight on. And I will ask each of the paper givers to restrict themselves to 20 minutes. Each of the papers, we have first the two papers in a row, and I will not do any further introductions, and then we open it up for questions for about 20 minutes. And one other change is that instead of Vimalin sitting here reading her own paper, I will pretend to be her for about 20 minutes because her voice has gone. And so I think without any further introduction, Joshua, if you can come to the podium and speak to us, we would be very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation from Hans and Crash for me to be here with you.
Louder, please.
Okay. All right. It's my pleasure to be here with you. And today, I thought I might get a slightly informal paper to talk through my experience, as well as my recent research, a book project, which is coming out next month. I thought I should brought a book with me, but I thought this kind of like a promotion, so I decided not to. This is the topic of, this is the title of the book. But from the book, what I was trying to say is to pick up some points to respond, particularly to Professor Xu's talk yesterday about transforming energies, creative energies, from the reality to art practice. I think this is exactly what happens in the world of photographic practice in China. And we can see the rise of Chinese contemporary photography in the international arena. But after my talk today, perhaps we can re-examine the phenomenon of this contemporary photography, and we can see without such a reality, that will not happen, simply. Okay. I was in many years ago. I visited a very small town. Well, it's not that small. Zurich. Many years ago. I was sitting in a pub, having a pizza, and there was a little printmaking piece on the walls. It's an original piece. It's very small. It marked around about like 1783 or 1785. I couldn't remember exactly. So I watched that. You've got the original signature, very nice, very interesting image. And then that's fine. But as soon as I walked out from the pub, I was impressed because on this image you can see a street scene of that. It's exactly the same scene that you can see when you get out to the pub. It's actually quite normal. I mean, I guess this happens exactly the same thing in Cambridge. I met a colleague in town sitting here yesterday. She studied here many years ago. She said there's nothing changed in this little town. But I can tell you, in China, if you haven't been to China in the last 5 years, you haven't been to China. So this is the image, one of the earliest photographic image of China in Guangzhou, Canton, in 1860s by Phyllis Beatle. And there is an album of 28 pieces of photographs collected in Birmingham Library. So when you visit this collection, the whole image, there's nothing left in the reality in China. Only 150 years ago, nothing, completely nothing left. So what has been done in China? This is Guangzhou, and you can see the vast of ruins. By the end of the horizon, you can see the whole landscape rising up. In China, interestingly, that we don't improve our city, we replace it. We simply replace it. It is revolutionary action. And anyone from had an experience from the Cultural Revolution will understand that quite immediately. So this is the Shikumen in Shanghai. Shikumen 怎么翻? The stone gate, sort of residential, particular colonial building. And this is exactly the one that I lived when I was small. And nothing left. Anyone been to Shanghai, but you might visited Xintiandi, you know, but I think that's a fake. It's a complete fake. It's a tourist site. It's nothing original. You don't have the smell. You don't have the sound. You don't have the smell. And within this kind of space, it's very interesting because I call it's semi-public and semi-private space. It's public space, of course, that people and neighbors can gather together within that little narrow space. But sometimes they're all in pajamas. So it's a kind of private in a way within the neighborhood. And this kind of space will never happen in other cities. I don't know whether there might be some in Guangzhou as well, but nothing available, I think, beyond in the northern part of China. It's different culture, and the space itself actually developed your perception of daily life. And without those space, all the perception and the experience will be changed. And now this is Shanghai. I was thinking to use one of the images by Bertinsky, who got a huge image of Shanghai. But I thought, well, I can do it. This is my photograph from my hotel window. As simple as that. Anyone use the iPhone 5 or 6, you do scan, then you got this image. So, but before 1985, you will see a complete different city. So this is the first image that I wanted to discuss. This is a photographic collage by Wang Jingsong. Wang Jingsong did in 1999 when he experienced a lot of demolishing, and you can see every building to be demolished. You will have the big sign of Chai, which is to be demolished, marked on the wall. And it's interesting that Professor Xu talked about the power of the writing too, and also it was a kind of energy all the way from the Cultural Revolution, from the big character posters, and this is also like a statement, a sentence to the building. You're dying, and this is the way that you are going. And this is almost so sad to many residents who's been living there for so long. There's no negotiation, and the country and the urban landscape must be changed. Everyone knows Zhang Peili, but not everyone knows this particular piece of his work. And this actually is a less famous work developed by him. But I was trying to argue that use this photograph to be on the cover of my book. It was rejected by the publisher. Normally, the author wouldn't have the say anyway. So the reason I found this picture so powerful is that you can see the top image was photographed in year 2000, and the second image is in year 2001. Exactly the same place, same angle, same perspective, same shot. You see a different worlds. So this is the reality of China, 1 year apart. So this is what I was trying to talk about, the energy from the reality. I mean, art can do very little to us, but the reality changed our life. This is the famous Tiananmen, but if you look that closely, that you can see two visitors in front of the building. You can see it's a wrong proportion, and in fact, there's a lot of Tiananmen around the country to be established as a mock-up for local government. So this is the strangeness of the reality of China, which is original and which is fake, and creates such a confusion, which I will explore and introduce in a bit detail later on. This is Venice in Hangzhou. We are all going to Venice next week, but this is Hangzhou. This is slightly outside of the city center of Hangzhou, near the West Lake. And they're building such a residential estate, exactly look like Venice. And I mean, it's too simple if you say, oh, this is Shanzhai, this is a mock-up. It's too simple. This is actually another strange kind of creativity happening in China. And let's face it, and how do we discuss and analyze it? This is a real shot. This is a one singular shot. It's not photoshopped. It's a real shot. And on the right, it's a traditional sort of restaurant type of thing. And on the left, it's a Western disco, I think, pub or something like that. Karaoke must be. That's in Beijing, 2009. And the reality itself, if I didn't explain, if you see that in the reality, you won't notice. But if you see that in the exhibition, you will think, oh, this is a photoshopped image. But it is a photoshopped reality. Again, same. This is a very young artist. When she did her MA in CAFA, she got this kind of extraordinary series of photographs called Another City. She simply photographed the billboards who is advertising the new estate. It's like an imaginary life, another imaginary world for us to hope for. And the reality is very, you have a particular distance between the reality and the images before you. And strangely, a lot of estate is doing this kind of Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty style, and it's another fake. When we sing Shanzhai, we're always talking about the Shanzhai culture from the West, copying the West. But if you are talking about Shanzhai, this is another Shanzhai, Shanzhai from the Ming or Qing dynasty, a Shanzhai of tradition. Time is flying. We've got. This is Wang Chuan's work. He's doing the 8 great sites of Beijing, which is signed off by Emperor Qianlong, but nothing has left. For example, this is one of the Yanjing Bajing in Beijing, which is only marked by the tablet in the middle, if you can see. That's the original tablet by Qianlong. But surrounding that, you can see Kurhaus CCTV headquarters, and nearby it is the Soho high-rises. And this is the artist trying to create a kind of fake image by photographing all the squares around the country. And we all know this kind of squares, particularly with the statue of Mao, is going very soon. So he is trying to recording documentarily for the square and to make them tinted as old photographs. And this is the Hutong, not Hutong, that's the Nongtang, Shanghai Nongtang, the Shikumen that I lived. And this is the artist who is slightly younger than me, I think Ma Liang, who lived in Shanghai, had this kind of experience of urbanization or westernization, if you like, of all the buildings. And when, just before all this kind of space is gone, he made this kind of dramatic performance within the Hutong and make the photographs. I particularly like Yao Lu's humor when he photographing this kind of construction waste covered by the green sheets, turn them into a poetic literati landscape. Can you see they are rubbishes actually? Yeah. And Jiang Pengyi, very young artist, again talking about how the urban environment can be changed and demolished and changed to another city, and city seems to be getting smaller and smaller, not smaller, minor and minor to be easily controlled, to be developed. So he made this kind of unregistered city within an interior space. But this is purely photoshopped. Chen Shaoxiong, again, this is a very early work that presented by a sort of a small mock-up installation moving around the city of Guangzhou to take the photograph to symbolize that the landscape of the city can be changed so easily. And you can see the combination between the Tiananmen Square and Egypt pyramids in the distance. That's by Hu Jieming in 2004. And one thing that I need to add on is that he's collecting all the postcards all around the world, and combining those postcards represent the hybrid cities, inspired again by the rapid transformation, urban transformations in China. And this is another extraordinary piece of work by Hu Jieming with a team of more than 10 assistants to complete that work in 1 month, which is simply a satellite image of Guangzhou but he used the buildings and architectures in Shanghai to replace the whole city in Guangzhou. So you can see, you can identify that there's a stadium on the left top there. That's the Shanghai Stadium, but it's in Guangzhou, strangely. But you've got the identical element of the two cities, that you always got the river in the middle. But in Guangzhou, you've got Aishadao in the middle too. The Shanghai one doesn't have an island. But you still see this kind of, you can't recognize which city is that. A lot of artists dealing with the Three Gorges Dam project. And this is, again, a very young artist who is from Sichuan, from Kaishan, which is his hometown. And he took the last photograph before the flood comes in to flood the whole city. But obviously, this is a photoshopped image. But more interestingly is this work. I believe Zhuang Hui is the earliest artist dealing with the project of Three Gorges Dam in 1995. And he envisaged this is such a cultural and political problem for the whole nation, and natural too. So he went there, he dug more than 100 holes on the ground, which is going to be flooded by the water when the project coming up. So he dug those holes and took the photograph, and he keeps silent for 10 years. He did nothing after that. So this is the image he videoed in 2008. So the whole duration of the artwork is more than 13 years for completion. But the starting point and the ending point actually is the evidence that the artist made a human mark on the ground that you can never see that again. And that's a success of the artwork achieved by the reality, by the energy of the project itself. So this is the final presentation of the work. Simply, there's 100 holes on the ground. And I think I'm quite pleased to use this image to close this talk. And we can see that this is to dig those 800 holes is artistic, individual, and human energy. But for that to be a great piece of art, it is the energy of the reality. Thank you.
So you have to imagine that I am Vimalin, so please do. And this is actually important in the beginning, because we begin by saying, 5 years ago, I eloped. Taking only a few belongings with me, I bought a plane ticket, left my family behind, and boarded a plane to Xi'an, a city in the heart of the Yellow River Valley. I was in love, not with the man I was following, but with his architecture. Before I begin the story of my adventure, let me introduce the man in the picture. His staff members call him Q Ma, but newspapers and architectural magazines refer to him more commonly as Ma Qingyun, the current dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Southern California. Born in 1965, Ma Qingyun came to fame and power rather early in his life. At the age of 31, he established his own architectural firm in New York, and when he turned 36, his firm, Mada Spam, launched a China headquarters in Shanghai. 5 years later, having barely passed his 40th birthday, Ma was invited to apply for consideration for the deanship at the School of Architecture at USC, the University of Southern California. When the Board of Trustees of USC announced its decision in May 2007, appointing Ma Qingyun Dean of its School of Architecture, Ma became one of the youngest deans of American schools of architecture ever appointed since World War II. The story of Ma's life is a combination of Cinderella and self-made immigrant. Leaving China in the 80s, Ma followed his then-girlfriend and now wife to study in the United States and subsequently entered the Graduate School of Fine Arts for a Master's of Architecture degree at the University of Pennsylvania. After graduation, he worked at Kohn Pedersen Fox in New York. There, in the Big Apple, Ma was introduced to Rem Koolhaas, the Pritzker Prize-winning architect. Koolhaas must have recognized Ma's talents, as he soon invited him to join his newly formed Harvard project for the study of the city. As Koolhaas became involved with more projects in China, Ma also became one of his close friends and supporters, which reportedly also led to Koolhaas's winning the competition to design the CCTV headquarters in Beijing. In 1996, Ma left Kohn Pedersen Fox to open his own architectural firm, Mada Span, which soon grew into one of the most innovative design firms in China. But in addition to his architectural career, Ma is also a capable entrepreneur. In 2007, Ma's firm expanded his firm's scope to include hospitality business with projects in his hometown, the Jade Valley in Lantian in Shanxi province. In a year, he established a vineyard and designed a guest house hotel in the heart of a rural village called Well Hall. And it was there where I rendezvoused with Ma. Eloping, strictly speaking, would not be the most precise description of my travels to Xi'an to spend time with Ma Qingyun. Nonetheless, considering how haphazard the process was, to say that I made an impromptu decision to run off should be valid. We first met at a panel I organized for the College Art Association's annual meeting, in which I served as the moderator and he a panelist. After the panel, Ma suggested that I visit him at his headquarters in China to learn more about his work. And thus, on a midsummer day, I arrived at the Xi'an airport, where Ma's assistant was waiting for me. Soon I was whisked into an SUV and driven out to Lantian, a village town 40 minutes away from Xi'an. Lantian, with its inconspicuous location away from metropolitan centers in a pristine-looking rural area, serves as a perfect location for Ma's experimental designs. There, Ma has designed many buildings and experimented with what he has identified as the intervention of tradition and modernity. The Well Hall, where I was first taken, exemplifies this design character. The building was created with traditional craftsmanship, bricks from the village deployed in artisanal method known for generations in the area. Yet Ma put a twist on it by turning the form of a roof upside down. It is a familiar form of uncommon appearance, a scene that does not stop a passerby at once, but one that begs her to pause and return for a second look. The most prominent and earliest design of this character is Ma's father's house, the very project that shot him to fame in the international scene of contemporary architecture. To Ma, however, he confessed that father's house was probably the most difficult project he'd ever worked on. At the time I started interviewing Ma, his father had recently passed away. Discussing a house that Ma designed for him was even more emotionally challenging. The conundrum lies in the need to allow what his father saw as family tradition to continue while simultaneously permitting the elderly man to immerse in new architectural spaces. A sense of tradition was defined as a familiarity, a way of life and daily sameness, both practically and visually. For Ma, who had grown up in a village setting, to push the envelope by redefining his father's sense of familiarity was an act of defiance, indeed an insistence that eventually exploded into an insubordination, a triumph over the patriarchal order. The house contains elements familiar to his father: a courtyard, Chinese-style shutters, stone walls, and woven bamboo wall textures. But it also includes new components that Ma was eager to introduce to his father: a lap pool on the side, floating partitions, and colorfully painted doors. As Ma explained to me, the house's seemingly traditional elements were borrowed from craft patterns in neighboring buildings in Lantien. Thus, as it appears, while the house is a reminiscent of a boxy Bauhaus-style building, it featured the window cum door frame whose designs recall folk-style homes, and a variety of reinvented craft-style ornaments and decorative patterns, whether on walls or floors reminiscent of familiar components found in a village house, except that all of them are actually new inventions developed by Ma. To critical eyes, the house is thus a cultural middle ground, Chinese taste that has been twisted, not modern, not traditional, but a combination of new and old, fathers and sons, which was carried out with a sense of humor and mutual understanding between two generations of one family. Father's house is an early work that exposed the way Ma situated himself at the crossroads of modernity and tradition. Born in the year Mao Zedong commenced the Cultural Revolution, but spending his teenage decade during the tenure of Deng Xiaoping and the introduction of McDonald's to China, Ma believes that for China to leap forward, it should not embrace all modern aspects from afar at once, but rather search for the roots that one can readapt from China's past to the present day. Although it seems a cliché, he admitted, modern China should be a blend of modernity and tradition, a society capable of reflecting upon its 5,000 years of history while moving forward with the advent of modern life. In contemporary architectural studies, Ma's design philosophy reflects those of many other architects operating in China, whether they are Chinese or foreign-born, from Herzog and de Meuron's designs of the Beijing Olympic Stadium, whose lacy steel surface is said to have been inspired by cracked surfaces of aged Chinese ceramics, to Ai Weiwei's residential design projects, the courtyards and its cobblestone path and walls. Bluntly speaking, in the past 2 decades, too many architectural projects have already been connected to this tradition-modernity motif. But just as I was about to express my feeling about the inundated ongoing cult of tradition cum modernity in contemporary China, Ma turned to me and asked, "But really, can you actually have a clear divide between modernity and tradition?" To an architectural historian, Ma's rhetorical statement hit the nail on the head. Terms such as modern architecture or traditional architecture are so deceptive that we tend to forget that the terms actually speak of improbability in reality. Architecture, thanks to modern architectural discourses, has long been equipped with an inevitable sense of permanence, of stability, physical presence. Even when a building ages or turns into ruins, the sense of its sitting in situ remains as either an extant edifice or a memory. By contrast, neither modern nor traditional specifies a fixed context or stability, for something can only be modern or traditional through a subjective comparison to something else, either in a temporal setting, chronologically or time period, or a cultural context, indigenous or westernization. Accordingly, when pairing architecture with modern or tradition, historians couple a matter of permanence with a connotation so elusively fluid. This is uneven juxtaposition of a perpetuated, enduring matter with the relativity of time, an abomination, as Doctor Who might say. Still, Ma's insightful comment about the improbable divide between modernity and tradition in architecture turned out to challenge his very design philosophy. The strength of Ma's design, whether at Father's house, Well Hall, or any other building project, often lie in its combination of forms perceived to be typical of hardcore modernist development, cubic, straight, rational, box-like, and what he identified as the twists of traditional craft patterns, both construction and decorative, several of which are commonly found in village settings, from brick and stone layering to folded doors and laced window trims. The newness that Ma introduced is embedded in his recreations of these patterns by tweaking their formation, breaking their lines, and inserting new elements. But here I ask, if the boundaries of modernity and tradition truly overlap, as Ma pointed out, why would Ma still need to interrupt traditional forms? As I turned to ask Ma as we drove out of Lantian, I did not have an answer. Then in Xi'an, when we had a few hours to kill before my flight, Ma took me to an art center that he founded in a former industrial district. It was there where I began to comprehend the incomprehensible conundrum in the great divide of tradition and modernity. Walking into Xi'an Center of More Art, known more commonly by its acronym, ex-coma, I was greeted by 12 soldier statues. They constitute an art project that Ma titled Terracotta in Action. Each one holds a posture representing one of the first 12 acts of Tai Chi, from the first commencing the form to the last one, known as high pet on a horse. Walking around them, I felt a sense of humor and insurgence achieved through design mockery. Time appeared to stop, as the warriors were frozen in the middle of their Tai Chi practice. Some stretched their legs, some raised their hands while arching their bodies. Those with trained eyes used to the solemnity of the first Emperor Terracotta warriors will surely recognize the absurdity of these statues practicing Tai Chi as much as Mao's own nonchalant sense of humor. The first Emperor's soldiers' renowned stillness is mocked, and their solemnity is replaced with movements framed in material stillness. It is an art project as much as a parody of hysterical materialism. I asked Ma what inspired him to create Terracotta in Action. Ma told me that he had seen terracotta warrior souvenirs sold at a gift shop at Birmingham. These souvenirs were small in scale, but featured unusual designs, from a soldier swinging golf clubs to an archer whose posture functions as a cup holder. If merchants could make use of the first Emperor terracotta soldiers for business purposes, why shouldn't he too push the mockery one step further? By creating warriors whose acts are not to be expected in ancient Chinese art, but also relating them to Tai Chi, the elements that appeared most exotically Chinese to foreigners. He had turned things upside down with a sense of humor, mocking the hitherto claim of Chinese monumentality in art projects. Ma's method was unusual and uncommon to not only artists but also architects. Any form of mockery in art objects, as historians of modern art would tell you, is often accompanied by social issues or the desperate calls for internal re-examination of oneself. Yet the Terracotta in Action project countered such a trend. In Ma's view, people think too seriously about culture and how the Chinese can preserve their identity. Modernity has many faces when translated into the Chinese context. It can also be both the bold force of modernization and the delirium of everyday life. As if he wanted to extrapolate the delirium of everyday life in China, Ma pointed outside the car while we were driving back to Xi'an, where I was going to catch a flight back home. There, a man carrying a fishing pole was walking on the highway shoulder. Leisurely and calmly, he turned to look at us with indifference as our car sped by. Ma laughed and told me that this is why he suggested that I should come to see this region for myself. Since the late 1990s, the PRC has been enthusiastic about creating a nationwide infrastructure to mobilize resources across regions. Some of the highways, sewage systems, and electric lines cut through the heart of poor neighborhoods or farmlands. Many villages had no clue about the government's grand-scale developments. Today, we saw a man walking on an elevated highway. Tomorrow, we might see a woman hanging her clothes to dry on abandoned utility poles. This is contemporary China, Ma stated. You cannot spend time to comprehend it. China is modern, 现代, because of modern facilities, but it is contemporary, 当代, because things are changing constantly. You spend 1 minute comprehending it, and then you lag behind, because the minute spent comprehending would push you out of the moment of nowness. The only way to comprehend China, you have to be part of it. Take it into yourself, its irony, and dissolve it with humor. Ma's remarks, his father's house, the guy on the highway, and those 12 terracotta warriors performing Tai Chi composed an enduring memory of my trip to Xi'an that spring. But inasmuch as I am fond of that memory, I also find it difficult to discuss, not because the person I interviewed refused to submit to the established categories in architectural history, but because he struggled to collapse the categories we have established. But maybe the main conundrum surrounding Ma and contemporary architecture in China has less to do with him or any architects, but with us, the historians, and our own perceptions of tradition and modernity. We're so used to identifying things categorically, and we allow those categories of forms, content, and historical significance to preform our ways of thinking. When those terracotta soldiers were dug out of the earth, we saw them as fully loaded with historical significance. Their disciplined appearances, mass mobility, and orderly presentation reinforce time and again our modern perceptions of what China once was. In a sense, as we view the designs Ma introduced at his father's house, we perceive those designs and their reinvented patterns with knowing eyes. As such, the newness in Ma's interpretation of tradition is effective only because his viewers are so unconsciously cooperative. We recognize in his design the craft patterns considered to be traditional, and thus the power bestowed upon him as the architect is conjured by the viewers who had long succumbed to and were trapped by preformed and represented representations of old China. The China we identify as traditional.
Thank you.